Welcome to Unapologetically Abundant Podcast. I'm your host, Petia Kolibova, that love coach who helps corporate women who have been pushed down and back due to traumatic relationship or childhood trauma in their past, which has caused them to see themselves not in a bright light that makes them people please and not show up the way they know they're capable of showing up. My mission is to help women who are on the path to heal from their past wounds move through their limiting beliefs and internal blocks so they can guide other women through online coaching, which is that deep down what they're feeling they really want to do instead of sitting in their corporate job. Each week, I will be offering an interview or an idea that will support you to leave behind what isn't serving you anymore and create a life filled with freedom, abundance, and purpose. No more hiding, no more waiting. The time to take care of yourself, to up-level your life is now. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this special episode of Unapologetically Abundant. I'm super excited to have Stefanos today with me because he's absolutely incredible. You will see in a little bit, if you're watching us on YouTube, you will see his energy. But even if you cannot see us and you're just listening to the podcast, you will see his absolutely incredible energy. And when I connected with Stefanos online, it was thanks to the love of his life that I've been following for so many years, and talk about universe and perfect alignment. You know, when I saw those two, I was super excited, but what I was really attracted on Stefanos is his mindset and the things that he was really able to overcome. When you look at him, you see his power and masculinity. And then when you read through his captions, his vulnerability, his realness, and how truly deeply he immerses in a man's empowerment work, it's incredible. So without further ado, Stefanos, I'm so excited to have you today here.
Yeah, it's so good to be here. It's such an honor. I'm excited as well.
Thank you so much. And you know, I truly love your work. I know you're specializing on men, but as a woman, when I'm reading through it, I'm like, who do I know who I can send it to? It's so incredible. And I really love your realness and how vulnerable you are, because I know I've been reading through your bio and you also went through some dark times and suicidal thoughts and depression. And it's incredible to see how you were able to come to the other side. So your bio, it's really impressive. I really love that. But now imagine that you are walking on the beach, because I know you like beaches. I saw the pictures. Who doesn't? Now you're walking on the beach, you're immersed and there is a fresh air and sun shining. You're feeling incredible, aligned with your purpose. And there is a stranger coming along and he comes to you and he looks at you and he say, I love your energy. You're so radiant. Who are you? What is the one thing you really want this man to know about you?
Wow, that is a really cool question. And so if I only have one thing, I'm terrible at this, because if you give me one, I want to say three. If you say three, I want to say 10. If you say 10, I want to say 20. But I'm going to honor the question. One thing, I'd look at him very, very clearly. And from my heart and from all of my being, I would say to him, I'm a willing man. I'm a willing human being. Willingness is an important role. It plays an important role in my life. Yeah.
That's incredible. And I really never heard this before. Why is willingness so crucial in your life?
For me, it's so important because willingness allows me to see the parts of me that I can't see on my own, that I struggle to see and connect with in the everyday flow of life. And so willingness allows me to take myself to the edge, whether it be my mental edge, my physical edge, my emotional edge, my spiritual edge, my relational edge. It allows me to see and feel and connect to parts of me that I've never been able to connect to before. It allows me to understand myself, know myself, feel myself in ways that I'm not able to. Willingness allows me to go to the depths of pain and also to the heights of joy. For me, willingness it's an ability to go deep into the substructures of the psyche whilst exploring the expansiveness of our own connected spirituality. And so for me, willingness allows me to observe my fears, observe the unknown, the unconscious happenings and patterns that are unraveling themselves within me that I may not be aware of. But when I commit to willingness, I commit to seeing as much as I possibly can, as opposed to hiding away from who I am, therefore perceiving myself to be fractured, as opposed to feeling and perceiving myself to be whole. That's for me how powerful willingness is.
I love that. And like anything you're doing, it's always so deep. And when you were talking about willingness, what came to my mind right away was when I started my own personal and spiritual journey about 8-9 years ago, when I went into the depths through my darkness. Who really guided me back then was Louise Hay. And I bet you know her mirror work.
Yes.
I'll go to the mirror and say, I love you.
Yeah.
I didn't do that because I didn't. I hated myself. I hated my body. And it was so painful. I really didn't get up and go to the mirror. But where I started was willingness. I was willing to accept myself. I knew it's a BS. I don't love myself. I cannot go to the mirror and lie to myself in my eyes. But I was willing to learn how to accept myself. So I really see how the willingness was working for me in the past. It's amazing.
It's powerful. It certainly is.
I love that. And so if you are, I know that you overcame also some dark times, what was it for you? Like, when did you decide that you want to be sharing it with a public? Because there are people who are going through the dark times and depression and growing, and they don't go out there and share it with the people. When was the moment that you decided it's time to share? I want to help more people.
Yeah. So for me, there's a few things that happened there. And initially, when I was moving through the pain of my own, recognizing and realizing my own trauma and my own pain bodies and the fears that I was holding inside of me, and I was equilibrating and neutralizing my past events and really understanding what was shaping me as an adult, I wanted to express that prematurely, and I wasn't continent with my words. And so we understand continence, or incontinence rather, as a loss of the movement of our bowels. We don't have any conscious or neurological connection to that. We're basically urinating ourselves or defecating ourselves. Incontinence can also apply to our psychology, our emotionality, spirituality, and our relationships. And at the beginning, I was very incontinent with my words. I was learning and growing and moving through my pain and then vomiting it out into the world, to friends, to people, to whomever would listen. But I really hadn't integrated it. And so I learned the hard way, as most of my life has been that story of learning the hard way. And then I'm a lot better at it now. I'm more proficient at not learning so under such stressful circumstances. And so what I started to do was be more introspective with myself, be more connected to what I was actually experiencing, and be with it long enough, be constant with it long enough that I would assimilate it and integrate it into my being, where I could really feel it, as opposed to being disconnected from it. And so then the expression of that came from a very different place. It came from a more mature place, a more connected place, and again, a more willing place to share, rather than coming from a place of ego and wanting to be seen. Not there's anything wrong to wanting to be seen. Wanting to be seen is a beautiful thing, and we all experience and have that. But where I was wanting to be seen was coming from a victimhood place, or a place of wanting attention, a place of neediness, and that desperate energy, the energy of scarcity. And so when that shifted for me, I was more consonant with what I was experiencing and learning and growing through, and then was able to express that in a more cohesive, grounded way. And that for me was a massive transition point in my life, and how I then saw myself and saw my journey in the world, and how I saw others as well.
And it's the second time that you are speaking about the feeling, like I get to feel it. Yeah. And as a coach, you know that very often many people, we are trying to avoid the bad feelings. We are trying to avoid the challenge. We are trying to avoid the pain. You know, we are like running away from pain. We're running towards the joy. What do you think about that? Like when you can notice in yourself or others that you are trying to avoid the feeling of the unpleasant or the pain?
Yeah. I think there's value in moving away from pain and moving towards pleasure, or simply just moving away from pain, because sometimes if pain is too consistent and it plays too much of a major role in our lives, it becomes too overwhelming and we become stunted in our action. And we give up, we become too overwhelmed. And much of that feeling of overwhelm over a consistent period of time, compounded over long periods of time, lends itself to suicide, lends itself to mental dysfunction, emotional dysfunction, depression, for lack of a better term. And so there's value in moving away from pain. What happens is if we're moving away from pain too often and we're not addressing the core issues, we keep repeating the same painful experiences in different ways, and we're moving further and further away from the core. So we're just trying to carry band-aid solutions to an issue that requires greater attention. So at some point, we really need to pay attention to what we're experiencing and why we're experiencing that. But even beyond the why is just sitting with the feeling and the experience of what's unraveling, and knowing that, see, the paradox is the more attention we pay to what we're feeling, and in this context, it's pain and fear, the quicker it actually dissipates, because we understand it, connect to it, feel it quicker. And so feeling is freeing. Feeling is freeing. Feeling is freedom. It's freedom from the unconscious patterns that are driving our behaviors. It's freedom from being completely disconnected from self and not living the life that we want. And so at some point, we need to face what is nudging us to be looked at, to be observed, to be witnessed, to be felt. And if we continue to avoid that, we're essentially avoiding parts of ourselves that are screaming to be heard. And so we move further away from wholeness and more into perceived fracture and fragmentation and this sense of brokenness. We're not broken, but we have a sense of it. And that then drives our behavior, our relationships, the quality of those relationships, and the way that we see ourselves and interact with who we truly are in the world.
That's powerful, really, because like you mentioned, we get to feel our way to freedom, because it's like when you avoid anything, you know, it's just going to come to you back and more intense. So
Yes.
do you have any practices that you can share with us? What can we do? Because is it as easy as just sit on the floor and sit with your feelings, or do you have any practices that help you personally to really face the feelings and see what is the core problem? What is not like, oh, I'm just feeling unhappy or I'm feeling upset?
Yes. So sometimes, yes, it is as simple as sitting on the floor and just quietening your mind and quietening your environment and just fully feeling what's happening. And when it becomes too overwhelming, we can engage in practices that I call conscious distractions. Now, that means that you're distracting yourself to give yourself some reprieve and find a break from the pain and the overwhelm that you're experiencing. And so I have a 6-step cyclical process, which I'm very happy to send you a link to. It's a video I've got on YouTube, and you can put that in your show notes. But I'll run you through just a couple of ideas of what that looks like. And so in this 6-step cyclical process, we want to face the pain and the fear, and we want to face the difficulty and the challenge. And part of what that looks like is sitting with it and just being with it. And another part of it could be journaling to what we're experiencing, putting pen to paper, writing, expressing our thoughts or our feelings in thought form, in verbiage and on written paper. When that then becomes too overwhelming or really distressful and difficult, we can then engage in some movement. So breath, sound, and movement is very powerful. So going for a walk engages breath, sound, and movement, especially if you're sounding and making noise as you're moving. You can do it on the floor as well. There's different techniques in certain expressions of tantra or meditative Eastern practices where you're sitting on the floor and you're moving your body and you're generating momentum through your spine, and you're making sound on the exhale, and on the inhale there's breath retention techniques. So breath work is very powerful as well. Again, for moving the energy, you're facing the fear or the pain or the distress, the discomfort, and then you're moving the energy. I also suggest self-care and self-compassion, being observant of how you're speaking to yourself, getting massages, being in nature is very important. Sharing and deloading that pain with someone that you trust, respect, and revere is very important as well, like a close friend or a family member or a therapist, a coach, a mentor, whatever. That also helps too, because then you're then being seen without judgment and with compassion. That's very powerful. So these are some of the techniques that you can use. Of course, just facing what you're experiencing without overanalyzing is very important. Simply feeling without judgment or without critique. In other words, you're not labeling it. You're not saying this is bad. You're not saying this is ugly. You're not saying, oh, I wonder what this is. Let me think about it. Where does it come from? Forget about all that. That comes later. Feeling, just being a witness to, without the judgment, without the labeling, as best as you can, for as long as you can, without getting into a state of overwhelm and panic and deep distress, is very useful.
I love that. And I wonder, because the first part we were talking about when you started to share a lot and you were still not so deeply connected with yourself. How do you know that sharing comes from a place like, I want to feel empowered and I just want to get it out so it's not inside of me? And when is it coming from a place of victimhood? Because sometimes people love sharing their pain because they're getting their attention.
Yes, it's a great question. So let me just go back a moment and just mention this word somatics. So tension, trauma, pain, etc. It really lodges itself in the body at a cellular level. So we use somatics to move the pain, to give it more context at a visceral level. So if you're feeling angry, it's about hitting pillows. If you're feeling deeply sad, it's allowing yourself to cry. It's even putting on some sad music to make you cry even deeper. Like really just feel without having context and verbiage and language around that. That's very important as well. So somatics plays a really big part in that. Something that I use in my own practice for me and with the people that I work with deeply, large groups, small groups, and individuals. You're going to go to your next question around how do you know whether your expression is coming from victimhood or whether it's coming from a place of deeper empowerment? And it's a great question. So we need to look at our patterns and we need to understand who we are. And so if we're coming from a place of wanting to share because it makes us feel better about ourselves, and so therefore we're looking for a reaction. If you're attached and you're tensile about how is this person going to react to my sharing? Are they going to reinforce my truth or are they going to deny it? And if you have tension around that, then there's an attachment to and a dependency on how someone else perceives you. Now that there in and of itself is saying something about your level of self-worth and your level of self-esteem, the way you see yourself, because your level of happiness or wellness or well-being is dependent on others. So that's a really important point to pay attention to. If you're sharing from a place of wanting to share and wanting to get insight onto what your thoughts and feelings and experiences are, and you're open to that, you'll come from your intention is very different. And you'll feel that, you'll know that. And so understanding your patterns, again, having people in your life help reflecting that is really important. Having a therapist, a coach, a mentor, a guide that can assist you in understanding yourself deeper will really help you get to the core and the crux of that.
Oh my gosh, I love that because it goes back again to the feelings because even when we are like, oh, I don't know. Yes, nobody
Trust yourself.
else. Right?
Yeah.
It goes to trusting yourself, what your body says, what you're really feeling. And yes, please, when you have a chance, email me that. I will include it in the show notes. I think that's really incredible. And, I could be talking with you for hours and hours and hours.
Likewise.
And I just want to know, what is the one thing that you would tell the men nowadays? What is again, we go to the one thing and one message. He's like, she's killing me today. You want to say
challenging me
too, but hey, you say you like challenges, right?
I do, and it ties in very well with the answer.
Thank you. I just want to know, what is the one message you would tell the young men today?
Yeah, be vulnerable from a mature place. Now let me expand on that. So I was listening to Brene Brown the other day, and she spoke to some of the defining factors of vulnerability, and one of them is there's a feeling of fear, there's the unknown, there's risk, there's emotional volatility, and these factors define vulnerability. And she basically says, you list a time in your life when you have been vulnerable and you haven't experienced any of those. And so it got me thinking about the deep work I've done with special forces soldiers and world champion fighters and so forth, which is really interesting. These are some of the strongest men in the world, not only physically strong, they're not so much the physically strongest men, but mentally, emotionally strong, ridiculous. And I was thinking about the experiences that they've had and that we've shared, and I'm like, oh, they're being vulnerable in their courage. And so you can't have courage without vulnerability. You can't have vulnerability without courage. And so when I say to today's man is be vulnerable from a place of maturity, I'm asking them to be courageous as well. From a place of maturity means and is defined by do your work. And part of my French here, do your fucking work. Like, do your inner work deeply. Show up to yourself. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with yourself. Don't be afraid to go to those places that are uncomfortable within you. There's so much truth in that. We live in a society of complacency, and masculinity in today's world has lost touch with challenge, which is a defining factor of what it means to be a man, to be a healthy masculine man. And so go into those places. Be vulnerable from a place of maturity, because when you practice that systematically and you practice that regularly and you commit to that practice and you're willing to go there, what happens is you begin to define your own sense of masculinity and you begin to become good at being a man. And this is another conversation for another time, but that's the crux of it.
We can schedule another interview when I'm back from Europe.
Yeah, definitely.
That's absolutely incredible. And I'm super grateful for you and the work you are doing, because I know from depth of my heart that it's really needed nowadays and tomorrow and yesterday. So last thing, what are the favorite places you love hanging out with people, where they can find you?
Oh, great. On social media, you can find me on Stefanos Safandos on Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, same thing. And my website, stefanossafandos.com. And if I'm not there, which I don't spend too much time there. It may seem like it. I don't spend too much time there if I carve up my day. I'm in the mountains, at the beach, living my passion, my inspired service. And that's where I'm at.
Thank you. I know you love hanging out on Instagram. That's where I catch you. But thank you so much for everything you're doing and showing up what inspired and fulfilled life lived unapologetically really looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Petia. Thank you so much for having me.